Hey, we're about to begin Midweek Refuel. I'll be doing it today, and I'll be right back. We're just going to walk around for a second while people get loaded up. Welcome aboard, though. I'm sitting here enjoying the rain. You have found the Pierce Chapel United Methodist Church midweek devotional that we call Midweek Refuel. And I greet you in the name of Jesus. I welcome you to this moment. My name is Howard White. I'm technically, I guess, the senior pastor of the Pierce Chapel United Methodist Church, though I'm really a co-pastor with my wife. And usually, she's the one doing this, Lynn. But I told her to take the break this week, and I would do it. And I don't have any special music for you today. It's just going to be me and a little devotional, just something to think about that I worked up for you. And I want to remind you of a phrase that you find in the New Testament. You may be familiar with it. I suspect you are. And that phrase is, we walk by faith, not by sight. We Christians walk by faith, not by sight. The person who wrote those words began his Christian journey in blindness, walking by faith, not by sight. You may know who that was. It was at that time when it happened to him, his name was Saul. But it was Paul who later wrote in a letter to the church in Corinth, and just one little phrase in chapter 5, verse 7, he says, we walk by faith, not by sight. And I can't help but believe in that moment he's somewhat reflecting back on the time when he himself was struck blind. And you may know that story. It's found in the 9th chapter of the book of Acts. He was known as Saul at that time, and Saul had authority from the religious leaders in Jerusalem to go to the city of Damascus looking for Christians, looking for people that were following Jesus so he could drag them back to Jerusalem for trial. And he was hot and heavy about it. He was breathing fire. He was wanting to squash this Christian movement. And he just didn't believe in any resurrected Jesus and couldn't believe people were buying that stuff. So he's on the road to Damascus to find more Christians that he can arrest. And right outside the city of Damascus, if you know the story, he's struck by a bright light that literally blinds him. And from the light, he hears a voice. And the voice says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul says, who are you, Lord? And the voice says, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. And then Jesus gives him an instruction that's very important to us and what we're talking about. He says, go into the city and you will be told what to do. Get up, go into the city, and you will be told what to do. And he was blinded. He couldn't see. And so he had to be led into the city of Damascus, I'm sure confused. And in the book of Acts, chapter 9, it tells us for 3 days he didn't eat or drink and could not see. I suspect he was struck dumb. And he was that way until a disciple named Ananias came and laid hands on him. And in that moment, his eyes were opened and he saw in a new way. I think that's the experience he's likely reflecting back on when he says that we as Christians walk by faith and not by sight. He had to trust Jesus in that moment and do what he said. Go into the city and then you will be told what to do. And that's what faith is trusting in God, trusting in Jesus, following even when we don't know what the way forward will lead to. It's not clear to us, but we trust in Jesus so that we walk by faith and not by what we can see. If you were to read in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, you would be told that faith is believing in what can't be seen. That faith is believing in what we do not see, because we walk by faith and not by sight. You know, one of the great examples of faith is found in what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's the example of Abraham. It was Abram at that time, and God came to Abram. And he like Saul, went through a name change. From Abram to Abraham. Saul went from Saul to Paul. But Abram heard God say, get up and go to a land I will show you. It reminds me of the instructions that Jesus gave to Saul. Get up, go, and then I'll tell you what you're going to do. Get up and go, and then I'll show you where I want you to be. It was an act of faith that Abram got up and moved his whole family, not knowing exactly where he would end up. He was one of the great heroes of faith. He lived by faith and not by sight. Think about Moses. I mean, Moses meets God in the burning bush and essentially says, I want you to go, and I'll meet you there, and I'll be with you. I'll show you what to do. But get up and go and take my people out of slavery, because we walk by faith, not by sight. And think about the children of Israel themselves. I mean, taken out of slavery, get up and leave, and then I'll show you where to go. And they got up and they left, and they spent 40 years in the wilderness, God providing for them. They eventually get to the promised land. But think about that. You get up and you go, you walk by faith, and then God reveals things when we need to know it. Think about Peter, the apostle. He's in the boat at sea. It's nighttime. They see Jesus walking on the water towards them. They think it's a ghost. And in order to prove that it's Jesus, Peter says, let me walk on the water. And Jesus says, come. Peter steps out of the boat into the water, keeping his eyes on Jesus. And as long as he did, he walked on water. But then when he took his eyes off Jesus, he went underwater. He sank and cried out for help, because he wasn't walking by faith in that moment. We walk by faith, not by sight. Faith is about not seeing and not knowing. Faith is about trusting, and trusting in God. It's been said that faith is the eye of the soul. Faith is the eye of the soul. This is not about physical eyesight. It's about spiritual eyesight. Sometimes you may hear me pray and say something like this: Lord, give us spiritual eyes to see. That's what I'm talking about. Help us see the unseen. Help us connect with what we cannot see, and trust and believe in what you're doing. It's about doing what God wants us to do, even when we cannot see where it's going to take us or what the outcome will be. Stepping out in faith, going through the open door, acting on what you know, and that is that God is, and then letting God show you the way. When I think about my own life, I can see times when I walked by sight, and I can think of times when I walked by faith. Guess which experience is the richest? I mean, hands down, walking by faith. Walking by sight is one kind of an experience. I'm in control of that. I determine the outcome. Walking by faith is very different. I give God control, and God will determine the outcome. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I trust God, and I walk by faith. And of the two experiences, walking by faith is the far richer experience. I'm speaking to you from the porch of the barn, and behind me is what we at one time referred to as the land of promise. And what I had hoped to do today, I'm not going to get to do, it's raining, but I had hoped to walk out on a trail. One of our members, Alex Ingram, when he was doing his Eagle Scout project a number of years ago, did a walking trail through what we call the Land of Promise. And I was hoping to walk out there to a particular spot and broadcast to you from that location. But I'm on the barn, and the Land of Promise is behind me. And if you remember the story of the Land of Promise, it was an act of faith. I was in my office. It's been a number of years ago, and the phone rang, and I answered it, and it was a lawyer representing Ms. Korn, who owned all the property from Pierce Chapel Church to Veterans Parkway, which is all behind me. And it seems to me it was about 90 acres, somewhere in that ballpark. And the lawyer was calling to tell me that Ms. Korn was about to release that property, and she wanted to be sure that Pierce Chapel had all the property that it thought it would need. And she was giving us first opportunity to purchase whatever we wanted to buy. And my gut reaction, looking at things by sight, was, we're property rich. We don't have any need for any more. And I almost ended the conversation there. But then I had a better thought. I said, but it's not my decision. That's a church decision as to whether we want any more property. And the trustees were meeting in 2 nights. I said, let me get back with you after the trustees have talked about this. So that Thursday night, that was on a Tuesday, that Thursday night, I took that information to the trustees. And they had better spiritual eyes than I did and said, we ought to look at this. They're not making any more property. And things got to rolling. The snowball got rolling. We called Warren Mason, who's a civil engineer in our church. And Warren did some legwork for us, and we put a team together and investigated all this. And the short story is we ended up negotiating with Ms. Korn for 23 acres that are closest to us, from our church all the way up to the power lines down Pierce Chapel Road. And the property on the other side of the power lines we weren't interested in. And this is prime property. And we knew it was. But we decided we would negotiate for that closest to us, about 23 acres. And she gave us an excellent price, $1,000 per acre. We needed to raise $230,000. And I was so proud of us that we did that. And I, the way I framed it as we were working on this, we'll find out how important we think this is. Let's see if we can raise the money. And we hit the mark. And we own that property outright today. It is ours. But I said this as we were going through that process. I said it multiple times. We have no vision for that property. We have no idea what God might do with that, why this landed in our lap as it did. But we followed through. We walked out in faith, raised the money, purchased the property. And then today, you know the story probably, the property on the other side of the power lines was purchased by Magnolia Manor, which is an agency of our South Georgia Conference, Ministry to Senior Adults. And they are in the process of building what they call the lodge on that property. It's about 60 acres, as I recall. And they are going to be our ministry partners next door. There are a lot of opportunities for us when they get rolling, and they're already selling cottages and apartments, and some of our members have purchased those. But we will have a long-term ministry with that body right next to us. So what a gift. But then in addition, and you probably know this part as well, because they're next to us and they have to get city sewage, we have always been on septic tanks. Every building we have, I lose track how many septic tanks we have. It's something like 7, 8, 9. We're going to be able to get on city sewage. We'll have to pay for it, but this gives us the opportunity to do what we've never been able to do. It was a win all the way around. And we could not have seen what God was going to do with that getting up and going and stepping out in faith. I just celebrate that. Our challenge, friends, is to learn to walk by faith and not by sight. When you feel prompted by God to do something, speak a word of comfort or encouragement or even challenge to someone, or to send a card, when you feel prompted by God to make that phone call, or to accept that challenge, or to offer your services, to offer yourself, when you feel that kind of prompting by God to take a step of faith, do you take the step, or do you hold back in fear? I don't know what the outcome will be. I can't control it. And I want to suggest that when we do that, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to experience the richness of God's blessings in this life. Because we are called, of all people, to walk by faith and not by sight, trusting in God, not trusting in ourselves. My prayer is that God will give you spiritual eyes to see, spiritual ears to hear, and a faithful heart to respond. And because you do, may you experience the richness of God's love and grace because you have walked by faith and not by sight. Okay, God bless you today. I'll be looking forward to seeing you Sunday morning, 10 o'clock for the Love Stream service. Lynn will be preaching this week, so pray for her. And I know you'll be blessed by that. I hope you've been blessed by this. Love you. God bless. Bye-bye.